I'm gonna get pedantic. What's going on, guys? So today we're going to talk about the difference between fundamentals and basics. Now, this is a really fine line, and you could be completely forgiven for mixing the two up, but I'm going to explain to you why, in my mind, I conceive of them differently and why it is useful to distinguish them. And this just goes back to the language. This is not some special private definition. This is actual historical precedent of the language. So the two words separately. Fundamental comes from the Latin fundamentum, literally meaning foundation, right? It is the thing that you build things on top of. That's a very big, broad, and somewhat vague term. Basic comes from the Greek basis, meaning a step. And now keep in mind, we got that from Latin, and in Latin, basis means base. And in fact, in Greek and Roman construction, they used a lot of base work to hold up columns and superstructures and whatnot. So again, you would be forgiven for considering them very similar things. However, if we dig a little deeper into the architecture, what we're looking at is, they couldn't just pour concrete slabs. So foundations were often made out of layers of basically aggregate rubble. And then they would have the masonry on top of that. And really the base is the final layer that the superstructure is sitting on. It's a piece of the foundation. It is not the foundation itself. So again, the foundation being the sum total thing, whereas a base being a small piece of the thing. And again, if we go back to the Greek definition being a step, well, steps are made out of the same kind of masonry that foundations are made out of, because it's a support structure that needs to be able to be load bearing to get you from one place to the next. And that right there is why I want you guys to understand the difference between fundamentals and basics. The concept of a basic is a small piece that gets you from one thing to the next. It's kind of a transitional piece, but it is a very strong transitional piece. And because foundations are made up of basic components, what you're looking at is the foundation is the sum total of those things all put together, right? You have you have that masonry paving, for lack of a better term, covering over the more undefined characteristic of the aggregate rubble underneath, which actually kind of brings us to the next thing. We often, especially in Wing Chun, we talk about concepts and principles a lot. And concepts and principles are kind of in that nebulous area too, so consider this a bit of a bonus thing, right? So principle, again, coming from Latin, comes from principium, meaning a beginning, an origin. So in some ways, you can use the term principle similar to basic or even fundamental, right? A principle is kind of in between there. In fact, you could look at principles as being the thing that the basics and fundamentals come from, and that's a pretty cool thing. And then concept is a little more abstract. Concept, from the Latin conceptum, meaning draft, abstract, or even just a thing conceived. So again, you could look at concepts being blueprints. You could look at principles being kind of the building material that you're going to be using, basics, the individual masonry pieces, and fundamental, the overall foundation that you're building on. And all of these things together help you start building up the superstructure of the thing that you're actually trying to build, the skill set, in our case martial arts, that we're trying to build. So whenever you're talking about fundamentals and basics are not the same thing. Basics are part of fundamentals, but fundamentals are kind of, right? Again, when we pluralize it to fundamentals, it does become almost the same thing. But when we look at the concept of what is fundamental, what we need to be looking at is how all of that is pieced together. So keep in mind, right, again, I'm being hyper pedantic here, and you would be absolutely forgiven conflating basic and fundamental, but I want you to understand why it can be useful to think of them as two separate things, as basics being part of the whole fundamental, the whole foundation. I think that that is a better idea. Again, these foundations are built on coursework, and so if you have, you have your initial grading of the land, and then you have coarse rubble, and then finer rubble, finer, until you can build up and start paving over that. What you have now done, right, is similar to how like the Roman roads were built, and some of these Roman roads are a couple thousand years old and still in good repair, and that is because they laid multiple courseworks of progressively fine and coarse rubble underneath, aggregate stuff underneath, and then they pave over the top of that, and you have this very nice solid structure that lasts for a very long time, because all of that loose stuff underneath is able to kind of shift and move with the movement of the earth, because the earth isn't static, and then you have the pavement on top kind of able to kind of ride that, and so you end up with fewer sinkholes and warping and things like that. It's a really cool concept, and so we have to think about the way we build our skills in a very similar fashion, right? We take our concepts, our blueprints, and then we start gathering together the principles of those things. And the principles, again, you can look at as very much that kind of, you could look at it a little bit as the rubble, but you can also just generally look at it as the material that we're going to be building this out of. So the concept gives us the idea, and then we source out the material, and then from there, we plan out our foundation, and then we build it with the basics. And then on top of that, right, the basics just keep stacking and stacking into more and more complex structures, but it's still all just basics being piled together. So hopefully that clears it up, and it probably didn't, and I'm probably just being over pedantic, but that's me. But clearly my intent is to help you understand things in perhaps a more refined way, and I guess that's about it. I'm starting to get into rambling territory, and I wanted to keep this short, so I'm going to cut it off there, and I will talk to you guys later. Good journey. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. In the links down below, you can find our social media, and I encourage you to follow us there. Take a look at our blog, where we have articles that go into depth that we just can't do in our video productions. And on top of that, go to our Amazon store, pick out a shirt that you like, and every little bit helps. If you're ever in the Phoenix area, look us up. Come in for a class, come in for open mat, whatever. Love to see you down here. You can find all our contact info on the website. Talk to you guys in the next one. Good journey.